Welcome to the Free the Bear podcast, a podcast devoted to California independence, where two guys talk about how crappy the government is and how dumb politicians can be, and that there might be another way. So sit back, enjoy, and as always,
Free the bear. Grrr.
We decided to do this with non-video because I'm a slob, and for me to be dressed up and presentable for this, to have my mug. And also, I'm distracting. I have ADHD really bad, so I'll just be like staring off at like any moving object. So it's good to keep it. And I've never actually seen what Forbes looks like, but I imagine it's a disaster meets second place in a beauty contest.
Excuse me, no, I wear a top hat. I have a cigarette holder. I just don't want to be among the plebs, and I don't want my picture taken. I feel that's low class. Again, I don't know why you people do this. You Facebookers.
I've been working on a joke for my stand-up about how one of the funniest things is a top hat, because people wore it as vanity, yet a top hat is the most like efficient hat you can have. You can use it as a table. You can use it as a bowl for your soup. A top hat is very efficient and is more
like a
useful.
Towel in Hitchhiker's Guide.
Yes.
The reference, yes. But by the way, again, Bill, how low class are you? Really? Soup? Again, this is for gentlemen, and obviously you're not one of us. As I sit here in my nearby Hearst Castle, what else can I say to you kind of low class people?
All right, Mitt Romney. So
this is my seventh house. Thank you.
All right, so I guess my first question for you, Mr. President Michael Loebs, is can you tell us a little about yourself and why you decided to join the California National Party?
Yeah. So just to fill everyone in who's getting in. So yeah, I'm Michael Loebs. I'm the chair of the California National Party, and yeah, I've been involved with the party since about mid 2016. So before the federal presidential election in 2016. And I got involved largely because, so for me personally, in my history and my background, I was born and raised in California. I've lived my whole life in California. Both my parents, specifically in Alameda County. I live in San Francisco now, but I was born and raised in Alameda County. Both my parents were born and have lived their whole lives pretty much in Alameda County. My mother's side immigrated there from China. My father's family's been in Alameda County since about 1900. So California is just all I and as much of my family as I've personally known have ever known. I've always thought of myself primarily as a Californian, although I confess I didn't really frame it that way for a very long time. But I mean, I didn't even go to the United States until I was 18. And every time I did, I was like, well, this is a different place. So for me, I think part of it is just feeling that I am a Californian, that I don't really have any personal identification with this thing called the United States. I'm not anti-United States or anything. I just think of it as that place over there. So for me personally, it has to do with being a Californian, thinking of myself as a Californian primarily. And I think that was sort of the first emotional reaction. Of course, I'm sure we're going to, in the course of this discussion, get into all the other pragmatic reasons why California independence and why focusing on a California politics is kind of so necessary at this moment in our history. We could talk about our economic stature, our need to develop independent environmental policies, our differences culturally in terms of civil rights and things like that with the United States. But for me, primarily, the first thing was that kind of emotional feeling of being a Californian primarily, which I think a lot of Californians have, but don't necessarily think about that way until they're presented with it as a feasible idea.
I think you're actually onto something with that because, I came out to California from Chicago at age 12. My dad got transferred out here, basically Southern California, Los Angeles County, Orange County. Long story short, my wife is from Japan. She came out when she was 18. And, she was always very thankful and always very grateful to basically, she kept saying it was like United States. It's like, it's so nice here. Again, it's multicultural. There's so many things going on. There's an energy here. And I always had to kind of gently correct her and say, like, I grew up in Chicago. California is a very different place. And, my family used to vacation constantly to Florida, into the Panhandle, like Destin and stuff like that. And I've been to other parts of the country too, Washington, D.C. Anyway, long story short, New York City, for example, too. Long story short, these are very different places on a very emotional level. It's something else. It's not really, it's hard to really kind of like pinpoint exactly the differences, but again, there is a different feeling of California versus the rest of the country. And that's on a deeper emotional level, as opposed to, again, like you're going to be talking about, I'm sure, pragmatic policy levels.
Yeah, and I think that, sorry, go on.
No, you go. You're the president.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point about, and that's one of the things that's about that in this idea of the California National Party is we are a political party that is seeking to produce an alternative to the two-party system, or really the one-party system that exists in California. But yeah, I think what's interesting and what you're pointing out is that, yeah, it's also an act of nation building, because Californians do have this distinct identity, and there are lots of reasons why it might be pragmatically wise to leave California, but we don't. Some people do, but a lot of us, no matter how hard it gets, stay here because this feels like home. And that's a moment that exists in all kinds of modern, national identity buildings. There was that moment when nobody was calling themselves an American. They were English, they were Dutch, they were French, they were whatever. And then there came this slow, motion into this thing called I am identifiably an American. And I think what's happening is we've been seeing that happen in California, for a long time, but especially, I think, accelerated in the last few decades, seeing this development of a kind of separate California identity, which I think in a lot of ways has always been there. My partner is from outside Philadelphia, and I remember we went on vacation to Monterey once, looking at the early Spanish colonial building, visiting a mission and stuff like that. When she was a kid, they'd go to Colonial Williamsburg and they'd learn about the Civil War, all these different sorts of things than you learn about. And she was like, that was the first time I really felt like California does have this distinct identity, this distinct history, this different story than the one that is sort of like the supposed American narrative. And the American narrative, California is just this crown jewel that the Americans picked up, in their march west, whereas California had a long-standing history for that, even before the European, colonization through the mission system and stuff like that. So I think seeing that different identity, focusing on that different history, and then seeing how it presents itself as a new California identity now is just part of this nation-building process.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I would agree. Because again, like, what do we share with like Australia, Canada, and the UK? I mean, it's like it's language, and also maybe some parts of the legal system, I guess, and some more or less, there's some overlap in shared political values, but it goes deeper. There's another like level that we're talking about. I think California has hit that when it's versus the rest of the United States, particularly United States that is in so much control of our Senate and judiciary.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And those I think are important things. Those are structural issues that the CNP tries to bring up a great deal, because yeah, especially things like, representation in the Senate, that's just something built into the structure of the American system. I mean, and Article 5 of the Constitution makes it one of the two things you can never get rid of. You can't ban slavery before 1808, and you can't get rid of equal representation of the Senate without the consent of all states. So it's just going to be perpetually the system where California is going to be underrepresented, because people like to talk about the House of Representatives, this is supposed to balance it out, but it's the Senate that approves treaties. It's the Senate that appoints ambassadors. It's the Senate that approves Supreme Court justices. It's the Senate that approves cabinets. That's where this power, especially in international affairs, is manifested. And no matter who's in charge in Washington, D.C., California is always going to be comparatively underrepresented in that federal system.
That's absolutely true. Actually, I wrote an article for our blog for the podcast, and one of the things that I brought up was that George W. Bush was being interviewed in one of these softball kind of things by, I think, CNN or someone like that. He was sharing a story about how his father George H.W. Bush was meeting Lyndon Johnson as Lyndon Johnson was returning to his ranch at the end of his term. Johnson didn't run for re-election in 1968. He was pretty much almost chased out of office because of the Vietnam War and like the increasing racial tension in the country. Long story short, George H.W. Bush, I think at the time was a congressman, so he was a member of the House of Representatives. He was telling, I guess because they're just friendly or whatever, colleagues, even though they were from different parties. Bush was a Republican, Johnson was a Democrat. Bush Sr. was asking Johnson, okay, so I'm going to be I'm a representative right now, I'm a congressman right now. What's the difference between me being just a congressman and me going into the Senate? What really happens? And Johnson, in his own kind of, colloquial, kind of salty way, said, well, the difference between the House of Representatives and the Senate is the difference between chicken shit and chicken salad. Meaning that the Senate is everything. The House of Representatives doesn't mean really, crap in the long term.
It's very true. How much do you think the Electoral College affects Californians in the sense of not feeling as if they are part of the country?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I think, the Electoral College is obviously a large quagmire for American politics. I wish I could remember where I saw it earlier this year, but I think it was actually a Republican strategist talking about how these two large political parties are about to spend literally billions of dollars to convince maybe 100,000 people in 6 states how to vote. Because the way the Electoral College is set up is that by and large, California has gone to a Democrat since 1992. It's pretty much in the bag. And of course, Republicans and Democrats both come out to California to raise money to go spend in elections in places like Ohio, in places like Michigan, in places where they need to win these sort of battleground elections. But California just sort of, for that reason, is utterly ignored in the presidential system. Democrats can afford to take it for granted. Republicans can afford to not give it anything because of the expectation that, why bother? You're never going to buy off California. And ultimately what ends up happening is California becomes, like many states in the United States, sort of irrelevant to the presidential election. I think a lot of people just even understand, I think people sort of understand the Electoral College and get outraged about it for a little bit, and then it sort of goes away. But it is a very difficult system. And of course, it's interesting because in some ways, it's not, if you ever read the Federalist Papers or whatever, it wasn't actually designed for this idea of, preventing, small states from being steamrolled by larger states. It was clearly there as a compromise, and they were very open about that in Federalist 68. But the thing is, in the 2016 election, they make all this big deal about how Trump lost the popular vote, even if he won the electoral vote. But the only reason Trump lost the popular vote is because of California. If you take away California and just look at 49 states, Trump won by 1.7 million votes. I mean, it was clear that those 49 states, even in terms of popular vote, wanted this person to be president. That, more than anything, just bespeaks this separation between California and the United States. Whether or not we can say California was gung-ho in any particular way about Hillary Rodham Clinton is another matter. But certainly this idea that the system, the Electoral College system, in essence, prevented California from picking the president for the rest of the United States, speaks a very strange electoral setup at the federal level that just is not going to change and is going to continue to leave Californians irrelevant in the presidential election process.
When you add the Senate and Electoral College, it's clear that the system is rigged against California. It's rigged against New York. It's rigged, dare I say, against Texas and Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Great. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's just that when you have Los Angeles County is bigger population-wise than everything but 10 states, and it's not like LA County gets another 2 senators. It's very obvious, again, which way this is tilted. That the big state, California, is not being able to pull its weight in one of the most important institutions of our country, which is the Senate.
And I think LA County is an interesting and important point, because the converse side of that is, while we're sitting here arguing and discussing the Senate, Los Angeles County, with its 10 million people, has the same 5 members on Board of Supervisors as Alpine County does with 1,200 people. And so those 5 members of the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, especially once you get out of the central core and you're into places like Antelope Valley and unincorporated communities along the Grapevine, I mean, you're talking about people who, in theory, are representatives of 2 million people, and that's not real representation. And so I think something else that we could do as we're looking at the problems of the federal system that we can't change is we can turn and look at the problems in California that we can change. Look at certain structural undemocratic features, unrepresentative features, things that exist because they maintain the sort of duopoly / single party structure of California, but are fundamentally, damaging to California residents. So I think that's another place we could look is, if we can't fix the federal government, what can we do here in California that can make our own government more responsive to, our people?
Well, especially with, again, the Republican Party, I mean, in the state as a whole, it still has a stronghold, I think, over certain institutions in Orange County, for example. But in the state as a whole, there is not much of a presence. It's dying. They're not going to get state offices anymore. It's more likely because of our jungle primary system that we're going to have one Democrat versus another Democrat for almost quite the supermajority of offices up for election. So again, we have to kind of step in as an opposition to the Democrats in order to provide something else, because otherwise it's just going to turn into what happens in any country or any place where one party runs everything. It's going to become more and more corrupt. There's not going to be any kind of pushback. It's just going to be a kind of a good old boys club that is just going to run until infinity.
No, I agree. And even when you look at Senate or gubernatorial races here, they only campaign in Silicon Valley and LA and San Diego. I mean, you have to, because that's the numbers. I mean, if you win the majority of that, it doesn't matter where else you win. And I think a lot of people feel alienated. I always mention Humboldt County because that's where I vacation, but Mendocino, I think people in Redding, Chico, they don't feel represented. We've mentioned several times, Forbes, it's absolutely true. As much as we hate the 2-party system in America, the 1-party system in California is just as bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very problematic. Loebs, what's kind of, I don't know if we can, this is a little bit too early, but maybe we can start talking about this. People want to have a vision of what we can do differently here in California. But what if, again, California, we'll just say we gave you a magic wand, and then all of a sudden we're going to have a brand new system of government, and California is independent of this kind of rotten federalism that we are dealing with right now. Is there something that you wanted to bring up right away, like what we can do different here and actually making sure people are taken care of?
Yeah, I think, and I think this speaks to a lot of things that are coming up in our 2020 platform, because of course we revise our platform every 2 years, as the Democratic Party does, and as other parties do, as situations in the world change. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the things that we need to address are things that are being discussed at, I think there are certain things that are being discussed at the level of American politics, but that I think are just fundamentally more possible here in California if we're willing to look at it. Things like, at least a universal health care system. Our current platform calls for a Medi-Cal for all system. Every California resident is automatically just enrolled in Medi-Cal. And, if you have private insurance or some other form of insurance that you prefer, obviously you can use that. But I mean, even at this point, a third of California is on Medi-Cal. And given, the current COVID pandemic, this has become more important than ever. People are losing their jobs. They immediately lose their health care. It becomes a problem trying to get through Medi-Cal. It's a process, and, it's in the middle of this medical emergency. So having a system where just everybody's immediately enrolled in Medi-Cal, I think that is something that we could do immediately as a step towards something like a single payer system in California, which I think would be beneficial across the board to all communities. And I think especially that needs to be brought to rural and inland communities about the benefits of such a system. And certainly I think just universal healthcare is one that is already recognized, considering, places like Tulare County, the majority of people are on Medi-Cal. Certain things like governmental reforms, talking about setting up more representative local government, because I think the reason you have people in like Humboldt and Mendocino and Butte County, in Siskiyou and places like that who feel unrepresented is because the Democrats are continually centralizing more and more power and authority in Sacramento and preventing people from feeling like their local issues are being effectively discussed. So, for example, one of the things I know I've been discussing with other party members is Senate Bill 625 about Central Basin water in southeastern Los Angeles County, and how there's a Senate bill to convert this, local water board, which has had many problems with corruption centered around Downey, many problems with corruption, stuff like that. But it's being done by Sacramento. And people there feel like they have no say because they can't convince members of the California Senate in Berkeley or San Francisco or San Diego or Fresno or anywhere else to vote another way about this thing that directly affects them and primarily only them. And I think that's a thing that the Democratic Party has been doing, is centralizing more authority in Sacramento. And, I think there's a reason why a lot of these rural, specific, currently Republican-leaning counties, I think are places where we need to bring the California National Party message, because we have to say, look, we agree, you're right, you aren't being represented, you are being ignored, that we do need to present a system in which people who make decisions for your area are accountable locally to you. And obviously that doesn't function just across the board. There are many things like resource management, environmental policy, civil rights that we need to have a California-wide policy about. But bringing government back to localities, back to municipalities, back to counties, I think is something that we could see in a reformed California system of government, which I don't think even requires independence. I mean, I think another thing, as you speak about independence, that we could talk about is the need for a new California Constitution. The California Constitution is one of the most bizarre, convoluted, unintelligible documents because of all the amendments that have gone in since 1879. We need a new, robust California Constitution that represents the 21st century. And I think we can accomplish that even before independence and introduce systems of government that are more representative.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, to me, I think you're hitting on a very good point, because independence or not independence, the fact is that California is a nation state. I mean, Gavin Newsom used that exact term in one of his speeches not that long ago. And we have a place that is 39 million people. And this is bigger than Canada. But we're running it like this is some kind of like, kind of like a la-di-da kind of like province in the middle of the boondocks. And we could just keep running things like it was back in like the 19th century. And we can't. We need to have some new structures put into place so people actually kind of feel, like you said, like they actually have the ability to govern themselves in their own localities, and not everything is going to have to be run up the ladder to Sacramento. And I think that's something that I think the California National Party can really kind of bring to the fore, is like maybe, again, like you said, a change in the California Constitution, number one. But if there is independence, I don't know if there would be a better term than saying like, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong in my thinking here, but a United States of California, because again, like LA County is huge. San Francisco is huge. There's other, again, rural counties that have very distinct needs. So again, we can't run everything this by such a centralized system as what is beginning to occur or has already occurred to long term in California as right now in the present day.
Well, I think you guys have brought up a bunch of really good points, but one, in America, the richest area in the country is Washington, D.C., and they produce nothing. They are just federal institutions. And I've always wondered why certain departments have to be in D.C. Why couldn't you move a department that employs 20,000 people to a city in Ohio or a city in Michigan, one of these places where it could actually boost up the economy? And you look, and people, mostly Republicans and libertarians, but they get frustrated with DC getting all the money and all the power and them being unrepresented. And I think you can see that a lot in Sacramento too. You see just a vacuum of money and power going there. And it's absolutely true. I understand why a lot of these counties are Republican, because they have been getting screwed over by the Democratic Party. An earlier point you brought up, Michael, the need for universal healthcare in California, for all the reasons you said. But California is a state of innovation. That's why we moved. My wife and I moved up, packed our bags, packed the cats, and we moved to California. We wanted to be in a place of freedom and innovation And nothing will help startups more than taking away the fact they are the ones providing for healthcare. I think if that's controlled by the government, it creates a lot more opportunities for small businesses and more importantly, tech startups to come and thrive in our state.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think that's something that needs to be highlighted, especially as something that's helpful not only, as you say, for tech startups and stuff like that, but also in places like rural communities where you can't form this gigantic corporation that's going to have this general health care plan you can offer to all your workers. That it's just more difficult to produce a smaller profitable business with a smaller commercial base in a rural community, and removing that obstacle by just providing Medi-Cal for all. And if you, as an employer, can offer insurance, that is preferable to you to Medi-Cal, then you can use that. But giving everybody just sort of like, look, if you're a registered California resident, boom, here you are. And I should also point out that that's another thing that we've talked about in the platform in our immigration plank, is the need to develop, again, even before independence, because I think this is something I want to keep highlighting, because independence is the ultimate goal of the party. I think it's what will serve California's needs best in the long run. I think ultimately, actually, it'll be better for the United States too, but that's their own business. But ultimately, I think even as important as independence is, we need to keep highlighting that the CNP isn't just about independence. It's also about what we can do right now that we can change in California if we can bring Californians to paying attention to California issues. Because right now, we get bombarded with federal news. We think what's important is the federal government, over which we have no say, and we lose track of what's happening in California. But anyway, to get back to my original point, is one of the things we have in the platform is establishing before independence a California residency, where anybody, regardless of their U.S. immigration status, can apply to be a California resident after 5 years, paying your taxes, all this sort of thing, and affording you legal protections by California once you become a California resident. And you have access to things like the Medi-Cal system. You have access to things like protection if you basically haven't broken the law. And so things like that are obviously, we can make them, it's not like citizenship where you can robustly legally protect people, but even starting with something like that, I think are things that we can do before independence that are not going to be done by the California Democrats, and can be done because we are looking at something from a California perspective, not from like, how will this serve the federal Democratic Party? How will this serve my future run for president or my future run for senator? But how is this going to work for California? And I think being able to sell that to all communities across California will be beneficial, because I think as you say, it's like a lot of these rural counties, when I talk to people from rural California, for a lot of them, it's not even so much that they're diehard Republicans. It's just that they would never be caught dead being a Democrat, because the Democrats are those people in Sacramento who do these things to us without listening to us, without paying attention to our representatives, without coming in and seeing how it's going to affect our lives. And so it's not so much that they're invested in the Republican Party as they are, disenfranchised from the Democratic Party. And so being able to go into those communities and say, look, here's a non-Republican alternative that wants to look at things like, locally accountable government. Being able to give that message, I think, gives us something that we can bring to all parts of California.
If I can just make a segue here, one of the things that people are having trouble with is envisioning this kind of process of independence, a process where California really does become its own nation state. Is there something where, or again, if you can envision a scenario of how this would exactly play out? I mean, again, I don't want to put you in a spot, because it's a much more complex matter than I think people realize. It's not like some kind of like easy game plan kind of thing behind this, but do you have any thoughts about exactly how this would play out, or again, what the scenario could be? Or again, what circumstances would actually bring about that, the next headline in every news organization is California has achieved independence and the U.S. is walking away?
I'm not a prophet, to quote the possibly apocryphal statement by Harold Macmillan, what is it that makes politics so hard? Events, my dear boy, events. So it's hard to say, like, especially in a rapidly changing world environment like we have now. But but just to hit a few things on that question. So I think first of all, speculatively, if we're imagining this as an orderly transitory process. I mean, I think basically, if there's any metaphor that I think works for the relationship between California and the United States, it's just like a marriage that doesn't work anymore. And it's like, look, we can make this long, drawn out divorce that involves a lot of acrimony, and a lot of conflict, or we can just say our lives have moved different directions. Let's just, split up the property and go our separate ways. And perhaps thinking that the latter is possible is a certain type of naivete. But I think probably the structural way it could be done is, first of all, one thing I want to point out is a lot of people, every article I ever read talks about the need for a constitutional amendment for independence. That it's not in the Constitution, it needs to be an amendment, you need to get 2/3 of the states, blah, 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 blah. That's nonsense. That is, as near, from the con law people I've talked to, that is nonsense. The decision Texas v. White, Supreme Court Justice, Salmon P. Chase, writes that a state is part of the United States and that it can only become free through revolution or the consent of the states. And so what that bespeaks is, first of all, he doesn't say you can't do it, which means it's in the Constitution somewhere already. Salmon P. Chase is not a stupid guy. If it's not in the Constitution, he wouldn't say it. So something called consent of the states opens up this possibility for it. The thing is, because there's no case law about this, we're just going to kind of have to do it. And someone's probably going to challenge it in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's going to have to judge on it. But I think in terms of like the practical in-between steps and stuff like that, I think we can envision, for example, the transition of certain lower level federal responsibilities being transferred to California. Things like the post office, I think, are things that California could do as a separate California institution. That's kind of like a low impact, low level, non-fearful thing you can transfer away from the federal government. Hell, half the federal government wants to get rid of the federal post office anyway. Things like the rail system and the bus network, which we could convert into a transportation system throughout California. Hell, I think you could probably combine it with a postal system and make it very efficient. Things like that, moving things like healthcare into California's arena. And while doing that, combine it with, in essence, sort of a withdrawal of funds to the United States. So sort of treat California as a single taxpayer. And as we undertake more responsibilities ourselves, we send less money to the federal government, but they also have to pay for less because California is taking care of more stuff on its own. And that sort of weans the United States off of California's tax money. It allows California to start building up a national infrastructure. But yeah, I mean, I think all of these things are possible. And I think going in with an attitude of sort of like, well, the United States is just always going to be unreasonable. It's just going to have to be like, through the sort of like brute, not violence, but sort of like, you're just going to have to like force them to give you up. I don't think it needs to be like that. Perhaps it will, but I don't think it needs to be like that in any way. I don't think there's any reason why this needs to be confrontational. I'm often reminded of the political philosopher Edmund Burke, who was a member of parliament during the American Revolution, who would give these impassioned speeches that would say, look, you guys are wasting your time. Just let the Americans go. You're going to waste a lot of effort, a lot of money. Just let them go and trade with them and be done with it. And I think there is the possibility of that. Again, perhaps that is overly optimistic, but I think it is essentially just an idea whose time has come that can be done in an orderly transitional manner.
I've brought this up to many people. It's not going to be the red states that want to keep California in. I think it's going to be those blue states that depend on our donor money. I even heard someone mention, and it made sense, once we leave, everyone's worried, oh, well, then the Republicans will have a supermajority forever. No, our population, it just gets spread back out. Our representatives, our Congress people get spread back out, and they will tend to go to more urban areas anyways that vote Democrat. So they're not really going to be losing any votes. I think deep down it's just Democrats in other states take our donor money for granted and our votes for granted.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point. And yeah, I mean, I think also personally, I think in a lot of ways, I have a friend of mine who's, from a working class family from Cleveland, who's out here in California now. And we were talking about this. I think in a lot of ways, the association of the federal Democratic Party with California hurts the Democrats in a lot of places where they need to start winning again, in places like Ohio, in places like Michigan, in places like Minnesota, in places like Wisconsin. I think this association with sort of like this like ultra left-wing coastal California mentality, the Nancy Pelosi who's coming to San Francisco-ize the United States, I think in a lot of ways that imaging hurts the Democratic Party, which traditionally has depended upon, blue-collar workers in middle America, to swing those states into the Democratic column. So in a lot of ways, I think what California's exit will do is force the Democratic Party to no longer rely on this sort of, on those 55 electoral votes, to have to craft a message, that gets them power again. For me, I mean, obviously the United States is one of the elephants in the room, so you have to care what happens to them. But ultimately, for me, I have no idea what motivates voters in the United States. I've never been a voter in the United States, and I think kind of like how that reacts is up to them. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think a lot of red states would be happy to see us go. I think really what just bothers most people in the United States when they hear this more, even people who hate California, is just this sort of psychological reaction that somebody would want to leave the United States. I think there's something that's almost kind of offensive to certain Americans just about that very idea. And I think that's something that slowly will just need to be worked on. But I think a lot of Americans a lot of Americans even see California as something different already. So I don't think that's much of a hard sell.
Can I ask you, besides like we kind of heard, like we kind of hit certain points already, but okay, what's to say again? California's independent again. What's to say? Maybe you're the president or prime minister of this new California. Besides universal health care, what else is something that you would really like to see change in California? Like again, like that's something that for years we've been held back on, or again, there's not invested time or money into. What would you like to see different? Like again, like in this new California, what would be a flagship policy you think that needs to happen right away? And also maybe make it clear, besides universal health care and besides maybe perhaps like a Green New Deal or something like that, what in particular, like, if you could step into a time machine now and see yourself in the future or see California in the future, what thing would be so like, wow, again, this is making us a distinct place, or again, like this is something we didn't do for like the longest time. What new thing that you think that Californians could look forward to under an independence?
Yeah, I mean, that's so hard to say because I think part of the response to that is that, I mean, I can speak for myself, and to a certain extent I can speak for the party, but also, California itself needs to be able to speak for itself. I think one of the problems has been is that for so long the Democratic Party has in essence tried to dictate to California what it believes, and nobody has listened to what Californians in all their variety want. So one of the things I did discuss earlier, and then I'll talk about a little bit more as a segue in, is again this sort of like focusing on sort of making different levels of government, different local, regional levels of government that can be more responsive. Because right now, the system of government in California, it sounds really stupid, but the thing I always think about is on The Simpsons. Whenever they show the flag of the state Springfield is in, it says, it's got a star and it says, not just another state. And, kind of that's what I think about California. You can't run California like Wyoming. You can't run California like Iowa. You can't run California like Kentucky. We have 80 members in our assembly who have to represent 500,000 people each. We have 40 state senators, which means each of them have to represent 1 million people. We have this archaic board of supervisors system where every county except San Francisco has 5, regardless of their size. we have these structures that, as you mentioned, are left over from a sort of 19th and early 20th century version of government. And so one thing we need to do is reform our system of government. Stop thinking that all we can do is repeat what the United States does. To start looking at how governments have shaped themselves in different parts of the world. What has worked where and for what reasons? What can work best for California? Because California is a diverse and complex place, geographically, economically, and so forth. So I think in a lot of ways the answer to that question is going to be different in certain different places. But to get to some more like sort of specific policies, I know one of the things that's very important to many members of the party is the development of a UBI system in California, which in our platform is combined with a system of negative income tax, to again sort of develop the growth of income inequality in California, and especially how that manifests in rural versus urban areas, is becoming a major issue. And I think developing a UBI system to replace this kind of convoluted, complex, American welfare system, such as it is, and replacing that with just a system of UBI combined with a negative income tax system. I think that is something that I think Californians would be wise to be able to put into place as soon as we're able to sort of control our own taxation, which is, again, something we can't really do. I would like to see California be able to take a stronger lead in environmental matters, especially considering that much of California's population centers are going to be drastically affected by climate change in the coming century. And I think California can be a major leader in that in a way the United States is refusing to be. So I think that's definitely another place where an independent California would be important. And I think one of the most significant ones, talking about California identity, is I think what California has a potential to explicitly be is the first, if not the first nation, no, I'll go that far. I mean, I think the Western Hemisphere, because of its history, has been building this, but California can be the first nation that can very explicitly talk about nationality separated from ethnicity. And I think, frankly, the human species as a whole could use that as a model forward. I think the ability for California to be a place that is not about a homeland for a specific ethnicity or for a specific type of people, but California as a national identity, as a project that we all come to this place to work on together. And when you're a place like California, where 50% of our population today, right now, was born outside California, half of California, even right now, was born outside California. So we even now are a place that's not about Californians, these people, but California, this idea, California, this project. And I think being able to do that as part of California's national identity, that's something that can really be beneficial to ourselves and actually to human history as a whole.
I'm going to say a reason I think California becoming its own nation is beneficial to the world, and especially America. We will have the opportunity to innovate when it comes to geoengineering. Right now, it's too late. Climate change is here. And I love that in our policy, we have discussion of levees, and I forget the exact scientific term, but ways to keep the San Francisco Bay from flooding. But if we can lead the way in ways to combat and deal with climate change, and then export that to the United States, that is a very beneficial thing to the United States. The other thing I was going to say, where California definitely leads the way, and the way you were talking just kind of reminded me, we're the first state to say that our data is a value, and it's a property that is ours. And I absolutely love that, because one of my big concerns is the AI race. And right now, America is really close to falling behind China. And I think most of the AI development is in California, and I think a lot of it is slowed down by the United States. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Well, I mean, I think that's interesting, especially when you talk about technology and stuff like that. And I think that also ties in with sort of the cultural thing I was talking about. Because I have a friend of mine, he was born in Malta, but I mean, he came to California in 1969 and hasn't left since then. And I remember we were having a discussion about the English language, and he was talking about how, you know, how amazed he is about how much the English language has proliferated around the globe, and it's because of, you know, the dominance, the global importance of the United States, you know, all this technology from America, all this media from America. And I stopped and I was like, well, where is this technology coming from? Like, is it coming from the United States, or really it's coming from California? Where is this media, you know, these movies and, you know, much of this music and stuff like that that's making America so important? It's coming from California. I mean, increasingly, it's true. English, for better or for worse, is becoming, you know, sort of the contemporary lingua franca. But to a certain extent, it's not so much because the United States speaks English anymore. It's because California speaks English. Like, we are the ones who are actually producing that technology. We are the ones who are actually producing that media and entertainment. And we can talk about the pros and the cons, the goods and the bads about that technology and about that media, but it is undeniably coming from this global center called California. People aren't learning English because they speak English in Montana. They're not learning English because they speak English in Alabama. They're learning it because because these California companies are exporting English.
No, I agree 100% on that. I often talk to people and they're talking about, oh, California, you know, high taxes, this, that, and they try to trash California. I'm like, where else in the US is there any innovation or products that are being sought by other countries? It's California, be it agriculture, be it technology, you know, wine, culture. Like, Delaware is not producing anything. They're producing things for themselves to keep themselves sustained. They're not giving anything of value to the world. And that sounds really snobbish. I apologize.
No, but very, very true. It's just, again, like the rest of the country, again, it's not pulling its weight. Texas has a weight mostly due to the fact, again, it's just an energy supplier, but their energy supplies are something that's becoming more and more outdated, and actually the oil supply has crashed because there's such a glut that, again, their prices are just through the floor. So yeah, I mean, California is really the one that's kind of just driving the rest of the U.S. economy. Again, like, you know, Chicago, Illinois, where I came from. Sorry, I mean, Chicago gets some points for maybe some blues and some kind of cultural influence, but the rest of that state is kind of a gigantic nothing. And I say that with all love, I grew up in that gigantic nothing.
Well, I'm going to ask both of you guys, but I'll start with you, Loebs. Right now, the California National Party, we do well in the left with progressives. What is your elevator pitch to libertarians and Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely okay. Well, I think one of the big ones that separates us from at least actually from most elements of the Democratic Party in one way or another is we try to have what we consider to be a rational, respectful gun policy. So the California National Party, our general premise is that guns are different in different parts of California. And I think it's very difficult for Californians from different parts to respect that. Like, I think it is difficult if you've lived your whole life in rural California to really understand the major problems with gun violence in some parts of urban California. And I think if you've lived your whole life in urban California, it's very difficult to actually imagine that situation when a gun is something important to you. But I try to talk to people. I'm like, listen, if I were living in Trinity or Lassen County, you know, and all I've got is 3 county sheriffs who, if I call up, might be there in 45 minutes, I want a gun in my house. Like, if I'm just living out there, that's what I want. But you can't understand that living in the middle of, you know, downtown Los Angeles, or in my grandmother's neighborhood in Oakland. These are just different circumstances. And so obviously, you know, for the CNP, we look at gun rights as something more or less akin to something like driving rights. It's, you know, you get tested, you get a license, You have certain rights that are applied to you in certain counties because certain counties are going to have different needs. And when you switch counties, you're going to have to be aware that different places have different laws. And this is, of course, going to be complicated for gun owners. But of course, gun ownership is a responsibility. And I think we can't just treat all people who have guns as if they are potential evildoers, nor can we assume that anybody who wants to make gun policy is coming to eventually take my gun. And so I think having a rational gun policy that respects the diversity of issues that are surrounding what it's like to live in different parts of California, I think that's one that's just sort of an instantiation of that being able to have a policy that recognizes the great diversity of needs among Californians. I think gun policy is just emblematic of that, but I think that animates a lot of CNP policy. And again, I think it ties to that locally accountable government. This idea that we need to bring things that, we need to have more robust local government. We need to have more robust city councils, boards of supervisors, perhaps even start rethinking, different ways of having county government structure. Sure, you can just have 5 members of the board of supervisors in Alpine County. Heck, maybe you only need 3. In Los Angeles, maybe you need essentially a large elected legislature with a county executive because it's so big and complex. But we need to start thinking outside the American box and thinking of California on our own to start making those kinds of changes. So I think one thing you can do is you can appeal to libertarians with this sort of idea that, look, we agree, this centralization in Sacramento is problematic. This one-party system that doesn't have to negotiate with anyone else is problematic. And you can solve that dilemma a bit by moving more responsibility to the levels that are more responsive directly to voters. And I think by doing that, you open up the possibility for libertarians, for people who are perhaps in more conservative regions, to make policies that more directly suit the needs of the people who are there. And again, you do this while simultaneously recognizing that certain things like resource management, like environmental policy, like civil rights, those need to be shared across California. But you can leave a great deal of things to local communities to determine what works best for them. And I think having that as an underlying, it's not just a sort of add-on to our plank. I think it's a fundamental animating principle. And I think that's something that could, that could appeal to more libertarian elements in California.
And actually, I just, Loebs, you put it very articulately, because that was the one point I was going to just keep mentioning, and again, it was based on your previous comments, was the fact that we really do need to have a new structure that actually respects the localities and the, again, like some of these smaller communities and counties, and actually give them more local control. Like, yes, we do need to have a floor about certain issues, again, like, civil rights and environmental rights for the entire community of California. But again, in the short term, or not in the short term, in the long term, we need to have a new system because, again, this is a nation state. This is 39 million people. We need to have something happen here where actually we can actually, have more control over, again, our communities than we do have currently now under our current system, which is very centralized or very archaic. And so I think that would be my elevator pitch to any libertarian, is that we can have almost a new internal federalism where, again, more power is devolved to certain places in California where, again, the local community has more control and actually can solve problems in a way that respects their rights and respects their viewpoints. And right now we don't have that either in the current California system, and that's something we need to work on for a new independent California.
Right, and I think it's interesting because it's essentially, if we're not careful, it becomes the California version of California's problem in the United States. The problem with California in the United States is Democrats don't really listen to us because they take us for granted. Republicans don't listen to us because we're not going to win there, and or Republicans are not going to win here. So, and I think that is quickly becoming the case for rural California. Is that there's this increasing sense that, like, look, if we can win all the executive offices and a supermajority in both houses of the legislature just by appealing to these certain areas of California, why do I need to listen to Modoc County? Why do I need to listen to Tehama? Why do I need to listen to these places if they're always not going to vote Democrat? So to heck with it. And I think breaking out of that system, producing a more responsive and I think also importantly competitive system will be crucial to that. And so one of the things we talked about in the plank where we talk about our legislative reforms, there's actually two things. It's converting, making a law such that members of the California legislature cannot represent more than 100,000 people. And so as California changes in size, the size of the assembly shifts a little bit. And this is done in Germany and certain Scandinavian countries. So if we were to have something like that now, we would have an assembly of almost 400 people. And that might, be like, oh, that just sounds crazy. But Canada's parliament has, I think, 335 people, and it has about 35 million people. The House of Commons in the UK has 650 people, has about 665 million people in the United Kingdom. Germany's Bundestag is I think something around like 710. They've got about 80 million people. So having 400 assembly representatives would allow those representatives to more directly represent the people rather than the current ones who have to represent 500,000 people, have to represent 500,000 people. And especially in districts that are largely rural, you have to make these gigantic swaths to get 500,000 people in those rural communities who have different competing, interests in terms of their economy, in terms of their geography, possibly in terms of their culture. And so being able to have smaller representation be legally mandated would increase responsiveness. And we can combine that with the other part of our legislative reform plank is changing the California State Senate, increasing it to 50, and making it a statewide partyless proportional representation system. Because obviously the problem you have with parties like the Libertarians, like the Greens, and like the California National Party, at least at the beginning, is going to be that the first past the post system that exists in California, replicated from the United States, focuses on people winning in certain specific districts. And if there are political parties, political candidates, political ideologies that maybe have broad support throughout California, but are always a minority, their voice is constantly silenced. If you convert the Senate to a proportional partyless system, and you make it so that any party that gets at least 2% of the California-wide vote gets a senator, and you get a senator for every 2% of the vote you get, that means more of these parties, like the Libertarians, like the Greens, like the California National Party, can start having a say within the state legislature. And that can be the first step into legitimating the concept of a multi-party democracy instead of just the de facto, single party sort of legal duopoly that exists.
You nailed it. And that is my sales pitch to a libertarian. I'll ask them in California, what percentage of your party, or what percentage of state senators are libertarian? And they'll say 0%. And I go, how would you feel if it was 2 to 4% libertarian? And their eyes light up and they're like, oh my gosh, is that possible? And that's really it. And I think I talked to you or Theo about the state of Jefferson. Mm-hmm. And my pitch to them is, do you want to be in Idaho? Do you want to be a small state in the West that no one in DC cares about? Or do you want to be a region that matters in California where you have autonomy? We're talking about local government in California. State of Jefferson, if you're out there listening, state of Jefferson, you would have much more say and much more power in your own lives being part of a California nation than you would being an irrelevant state in the U.S.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And I think that's also something that we need to respect and recognize. I think it's too easy to get in this sense if you're in like a liberal urban community and you look out at sort of rural California with a certain amount of disdain, like I know some people do, but it's like Jefferson is California. All California is this crazy, diverse, massively, expansive place, but Jefferson is part of California fundamentally. So much as part of like our history, part of our culture, all these things like, and so, yeah, that would be the thing I would want to say is that like, I think, a lot of this hostility between Californians, between red California and blue California, between coastal and inland California, between North and South California. I think a lot of these things are designed gives it too much consciousness. But I think as long as we're sitting here being pawns in a struggle about some power war happening 3,000 miles away in DC, we're ignoring the solutions that we can take for California. If we talk to Jefferson and the Central Valley and San Francisco and Los Angeles and Barstow and everywhere and find what is it you need, what does California look like to you, I think that sort of addressing of California, that recognition that we see you, California, in all your complexity, in all the problems. And that's the thing. It's like California, I think California is a great place. It's wonderful. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. It is my home. But I'm not going to deny it has problems. And it's going to keep having problems as long as all of us on the left and the right are looking at DC. Because DC is never going to solve California's problem. Only Californians can solve California's problem. And as long as we keep thinking the fight is out there, we're not talking to each other. Jefferson isn't talking to Berkeley. Los Angeles isn't talking to Mono County. And that's an especially interesting one. Of course, places like Mono and Inyo, have that history of, being where the water from Los Angeles came from and now feel like, here's Los Angeles with all this political clout in California, and we're just being ignored as our resources are being stripped from us. And you have to have that discussion. That's an important discussion for Californians to have amongst each other. And it's never going to happen if we keep thinking it's about winning the White House.
And, not only that, we are the last state that DC is going to look after. The absolute last. Every other state will take priority over us. And I think that's something that can unify Republicans in California and Democrats. We got to realize, hey, we're on our own here. We need to lead the way, and we need to work together to make California better and show America how it's done.
Yeah, and I think we can only do that if we start talking to each other as Californians, as we've been saying. And I think that's just, if there's anything that at this stage I hope the California National Party can contribute to, it's just, raising that awareness, raising that consciousness of Californians to start thinking that, look, we're essentially allowing California into absentee ownership. As we are being distracted, we're sitting there fighting over Tucker Carlson versus Rachel Maddow. These things are happening in California that we're just not paying attention. One of my biggest bugaboos right now is Ricardo Lara, the insurance commissioner, who has easily become the most corrupt insurance commissioner since the office became elected in California in the 1990s. But while all this is happening in DC, who's going to care about insurance commissioner in California? And the only answer can be Californians are going to have to care about the corruption of the insurance commissioner in California, because no one else is going to. That is our responsibility as citizens. And so if obviously, as I've said, ultimate goal of independence, all these policies that we think we can accomplish before independence. But I think the very, very first step is to just get Californians to recognize that as Californians, we need to have control of our state. And we do that first by recognizing that California is our home, that California is where we are from, or not where we are from, but it's who we are. And so this is where we need to focus our political attention. And we have to not allow ourselves to become distracted by these things happening in the United States. And I know it's obviously, I expect a lot of people in the future California are going to retain a sense of American identity. There'll be American Californians, just like there are Canadian Americans and Chinese Americans and so on and so forth. I'm sure there'll be American Californians, as there will be Mexican Californians, Chinese Californians. And there will also be people who just identify as Californians. It can't be about the United States. It has to be about bringing our attention back to us.
As you say that, I'm a New Englander, true and true. My family, I had family on the Mayflower, family that fought in the Revolutionary War. I've always considered myself a New Englander before an American. I chose to become a Californian, but you're absolutely right. I'm never going to not root for the Red Sox or the Celtics. The Lakers can burn in hell. That's.
Oh man. But no, no. I mean, I think it's true, and I think that's an important point you make, is because especially in this last decade, as like the cost of living in California has just skyrocketed, and of course it's harder to live here because, I mean, one of our biggest problems is that we still have, our infrastructure is still basically from the 1970s. It was modern 50 years ago for 25 million people, and now here it is with 40 million people 50 years on, and it's still basically what it is. So there are so many reasons for even native-born Californians to leave that, as far as I'm concerned, at this point, basically everyone is a Californian by choice. Like, I don't care if you were born here. We all chose to stay. A lot of people I grew up with in Fremont have gone to Idaho, have gone to Utah because of the cost of living, because of the way their cities have changed, this, that, and the other. And that's fine. You know, I had a dear friend of mine years ago who owned a bar here in San Francisco, Ireland 32, and he would talk about, you know, of course, the historical cultural tragedy and the Irish consciousness of the famine and the million in Ireland who had to leave and aren't there at home anymore. For me, if native-born Californians feel they can make a happier, better life for themselves outside California, you know, bless them. Let them go out and do that. And there will always be new people who want to become Californians to come in. So I think at this point, that's something I was talking about this idea of a nationality that can be completely divorced from ethnicity, or completely divorced from this sense of ownership by one group of people, is this ability to say that all Californians are here because we want to be Californians, regardless of where we might have been born. I think that's a powerful message that we can present as a nation.
And also, it's a very unique message too. I mean, it's just something that the United States of America was trying to do since its founding. I mean, it was a group of English Americans, German Americans, immigrants from all across the world. Again, I know this is looking at things like through kind of rose-colored glasses, but the idea of America was supposed to be a nationality that was not really based on ethnicity or anything like that, but kind of like, again, the true melting pot, that people came there, they wanted to be there, they want to be in part of this political process. It was a very unique part of the planet. Again, we had no background really on anything to do with kind of race or religion or creed or anything like that. And it seems like the United States has kind of lost its way, to put it mildly. And I think California in itself is almost kind of like, I think we talked about this before with Theo, that California is pretty much the lifeboat of the American dream. Like the ship is sinking, and again, the people who want to get out, they choose to stay with us. They're getting aboard this lifeboat. They're not going to go down with the ship, so we can kind of sail on to better shores here.
Yeah, I mean, I can't again, like not really having spent a lot of time in America. I can't. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like I've never been one of those people who feels comfortable about talking about what America is doing or not doing, just because I myself have never lived out there. But I mean, I think definitely, yeah. I mean, from the 1850s onward, there were people already calling California America's America, you know. And I think what you bring up is important. Where it is obviously the United States, as it was founded as essentially a white nation. It was founded as a place where Dutch and French and English and Germans and eventually Italians and Irish and Eastern Europeans, you know, Poles and Czechs and everybody could come and, you know, live together. And of course, yeah, this is a very European dream of sort of harmony. But when you consider that less than 100 years ago, those people in Europe were still killing each other, that like they were able to come to the United States when the native populations back home were engaged in two massive world wars. That's kind of an interesting thing. And yeah, obviously, like the racial problems in the United States are clear to, I think, pretty much anybody who's paying attention. But yeah, that was sort of like the idea that the United States has, that I think California can actually instantiate, because California is this, like, I can't think of anybody anywhere in the world, any nation, any region where people haven't come to California. I mean, and I think that immigrant narrative is just so important to California, and we need to highlight it more for many different groups. I mean, obviously, you know, as I said, I'm of Chinese descent. You know, my family came from outside Guangzhou. And my father's side, came from Alsace earlier than that, but all sorts of different people. We talk about this sort of foreign immigrant narrative, but when you think about African Americans fleeing the South, taking that rail line from New Orleans to Los Angeles, trying to get out of like the post Reconstruction segregated Jim Crow South, coming out to Los Angeles, coming out to start new lives in the Central Valley, out in Pixley and Los Palos and stuff like that. That's an immigrant narrative. The Okies, who crossed over the border, who were spat on, who were kept in camps, who were paid nothing, to work in agricultural fields, who built a culture in the middle of Kern County. That's an immigrant narrative. When I hear about somebody like Merle Haggard, whose parents came from Oklahoma and he's born in a converted, railroad car, that's an immigrant narrative. We don't think about it because he's a white guy whose family's from Oklahoma. But born, lived, died in California and made this new life here. And I think being able to go to that and saying that like everybody here, except the First Nations, who obviously the issues surrounding like the genocide of the First Nations throughout the Americas is something beyond the scope of what we can completely address here. But excluding that population, nobody has a right to say they are from California in any sort of real historical sense. And I think that can be a powerful part of our narrative. Not letting California be seen as the nation of X, except in as much as X just is California, this project of California.
Yeah, I think that's, again, all valid points. Again, it's just that we're building a project here. It's, again, this is something beyond this is simplicity of us being born in a certain place in a certain time.
And as great as our founding fathers were for their times, we're a lot more sophisticated, tolerant, and have a lot more knowledge at our disposal now. And speaking of founding fathers, I want to end with this because it's been driving me nuts. Loebs, we had a conversation in Fairfield and you quoted Thomas Jefferson, and I have not been able to find the exact quote. What is the quote you told me about Jefferson talking about if we reach the Pacific Ocean, we're no longer a nation, but we're an empire?
I will have to look it up. I think a guy, Julian, down in San Diego found the work, but it was a work from the mid-19th century. I'd have to find where he quoted it from. So Jefferson's, obviously Jefferson's view of sort of like the yeoman farmer and sort of like the decentralized social structure, his idea of constantly rewriting the Constitution. I mean, basically him and Leon Trotsky are the only people who've ever talked about permanent revolution. But yeah, I mean, I'd have to look up the exact book and I'll get in touch with you afterwards again. But yeah, he basically theorizes that at some point the United States will cross all the way to the Pacific, and eventually that land on the Pacific would become its own nation. Because in his view, having such an expansive country from the Pacific to the Atlantic, that for him was seen as something that could never possibly sustain a democratic system. Probably that comes from his influence of French philosophy. Yeah, sorry, I'm doing my job as a political theory teacher. But yeah, like sort of this idea that comes out of Rousseau that sort of like the bigger a nation gets, the less democratic it by definition can be. And so, yeah, there was this thought that in essence, the West Coast would basically become a colony of the United States in the way the Atlantic coast was a colony of Great Britain, and that hopefully the United States wouldn't make the same mistake. So I will have to go through the Slack and see if I can find the citation that Julian gave for that. But it was a very interesting read. So I'll be sure to pass that along to you.
Anytime I can quote a founding father too, I just feel smarter and people just take my word for it. So I definitely need that. Great talking to you, Mr. President.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, there you have it. Another episode of the Free the Bear podcast. Thank you very much for listening. If you can, give it a thumbs up. Even if you didn't like it, give it that good old thumbs up and subscribe. I'm very old, but I've been told there is a bell that you're supposed to push or ding or something. So do that. For more information about the California National Party, go to californianational.party. Or on Twitter, vote_CNP. And in conclusion,
Free the bear. Grrr.